I hope the video helped you in knowing more about Firki. If you have questions around any of the features highlighted in the video, please write to us at contactfirki@teachforindia.org. The link to the same will be posted shortly on the chat window. With that, let's move on to the webinar at hand today. Thank you for taking the time to join us in this discussion. In designing this and other webinars throughout the year, the Firki team is hoping that we can disseminate meaningful knowledge and skills that take us closer to our goal of improving the quality of education in Indian classrooms. In this webinar today, participants will understand the larger framework of 321's user-centered design, see examples of using this framework to solve user problems, gain useful tips and strategies to solve user problems in their own context. Now let me introduce the speakers for the day. Gaurav Singh is an Indian social entrepreneur. He is the founder and chief executive officer of 321 Education Foundation. In 2009, which was the year that Teach for India was started, Gaurav became one of the first ever fellows to join the cohort. He spent subsequent years building the 321 Education Foundation from the ground up by collating best practices from the international education sector and first-hand experience in developing interventions for the urban poor in India. He is also a recipient of the prestigious Ashoka Fellowship and Echoing Green Fellowship. That brings us to the norms for the webinar today. As I shared earlier, please keep typing your questions in the Q&A box. Also, share your comments in the chat box. Do remember that learning new things is often difficult, but challenge yourself and reflect on your thinking and experiences today. The best way to remember something is by writing it down, so do take notes throughout the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube and the Firki website soon. The speaker presentation deck will also be shared. This brings me to the end of my introduction. Thank you. Hope you all have a very interesting evening. Over to our speakers now.
Should I start, Anu?
Yes. Hi, Gaurav. You can start.
Hi. Great. Thanks for that introduction, Anu, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to sort of be here with you, share some of the things that we've learned, and I look forward to having chances to also hear from you, and hopefully this will add value to you. If we can start sharing the presentation, we can just go from there. Anu, you let me know once the presentation is on?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So, while the sort of, we get the PPT up and going, I'm very, very excited about this topic. Very excited to share it with you. I think it's a very important one in general for anyone who's creating or designing something, but extremely important for educators and people who work in education, right? The topic, as you must have seen, is about user-centered design. And in some ways, that's what education and educators do, right? We're designing experiences, learning experiences, enriching experiences to be focused and useful for our children, for other teachers, whoever that we're working with. So it's a very powerful concept from the larger field of design, but extremely, extremely valuable for educators. And in the session today, there are 3 things that we will be covering. So if you can go to the next slide. The first thing is, what is user-centered design, right? So in a quick 10-15 minutes, what I'll try and do is explain to you as simply and as powerfully as I can what is user-centered design. And I'd love for you to sort of try and summarize it at the end in about 2-3. So at the end of the section, I'll give you time that based on everything that I've shared, how would you summarize this in 2-3 sentences? That's first. Then what we'll do is we'll use what we've learned in the first section, and we'll give you examples of how we use it. And we'll give a very specific example of this completely new program that we built called CAPE, using this user-centered design. And at the end, what we'll do is we'll give you, techniques, frameworks, tools, three of the most powerful ones that we find that you can start using from tomorrow that will help you to try and implement this, right? My assumption is many of you are already doing many aspects about designing and user-centered. And we'll try and give you three things that might be new or different, which will be helpful to you to start using. So that's largely it. And we'll stop a couple of times in the middle if you have questions to answer that, okay? So with that, let's sort of jump in. What is user-centered design? And I think one of the most important things to understand about this, and we can actually go to the next slide about user-centered design, is that it is not a linear process, right? Now, technically, design itself, and every design should be user-centered, right? Where it's centered around what the user wants. It should not be a linear process, but almost all of design that happens, right? Even if you look in education, right? How does it happen? We will think up that we have to create some lesson based on some objective. We will then go create that lesson. Then we will teach it to the students. Then we will see at the end if they learned it or not, right? Or any of this kind. You think of you have to create a new program. So you try and figure out what the problem is. Then you'll create a new training, let's say for it. Then you'll go do that training. Then you'll see how useful it was, right? All of these are examples of a linear design process, right? And the issue with linear design process is you get feedback too late. What you built, is it useful? Is it not useful? You come to know very late in the process. So there is a chance that you could spend a lot of your time building something that is not useful, right? And the question is, why would you want to do that, right? Your time is precious, and that we should always be building something that is useful to our user. So if you don't want to waste your time, and if you don't want to build things that are not useful to people, user-centered design is a great philosophy to follow, okay? So what is it? If you see on the next slide, right? It has four very simple elements. It's very closely related to design thinking, right? Some of you might be familiar with it. It's almost like, think of it as a cousin of it, like feeding into each other. And the four parts, and I'll explain each of these very, I'll try and do it very clearly, are critical in how the whole thing comes together, okay? So the first part is about empathizing with the user, right? This is a part that often we skip. This is a part that doesn't seem important. But what we have found, what I have found over the years, is this is amongst the most important things, right? And more than the head, it is all to do with the heart, right? So when we talk about this, when we try and do this, we talk of words like serving our user, of respect for the user, right? It's about very deeply knowing who the user is, what their life is like, what the situations in their life are, what are the problems. And if you go and listen to great designers, people who build amazing things in any field, you will hear them talk about their users as if they know everything about their user, right? And if you speak with mediocre, not great designers, you will hear them talking more about their solution. We built this, these are the features, this is what we did, right? And that's the difference. Great designers are incredibly respectful of their users, are immersed in their users, and they empathize with their users and what they want. So if you have to be a great designer, if you have to do user-centered design, the focus needs to be first on empathizing with the user, right? So really to deeply understand, who is this person? What are their life situation? What are the problems they face? Why do they do what they do? And to not go to it from a place of judgment, not to go it from a place of, oh, they're wrong, I'll build something that will teach them what's right, but to really focus on understanding at this level, and really from the heart, and with as much openness as you can. And that's the step number one, right? So if step number one is the heart, the step number two is very much the opposite, which is the brain, right? Now, what you're doing in step number two, based on everything you've heard and understood, is you're very precisely trying to define the user need. And at the end, we will actually give you a way of how to capture that, right? Now, the problem is, and I'm sure you've had this experience, right? You go to a user, right? Let's say you go to a teacher who's struggling to teach online, or you go to a principal who's struggling, right? And you ask them, how can we help you? They will not talk to you about the problem. They will straight away start talking to you about the solution, right? This happened to us. We went to teachers. We know that they were struggling with teaching online. We asked them, what do you want? They said, sir, up app bana do, right? And we're like, okay, fine, but tell us, what is it that you want, right? Like, and in app, put these features. And this is a very common reaction, right? Users will always want to talk about the solution as they think it should be. The problem is they will always base the solution on what they already know, right? So what you have to do is you have to always keep stepping away from that and keep focusing on what the actual problem or the user need is. Now, sometimes the user will tell you clearly, great, thank your stars. Sometimes they'll tell you sort of there, you can make something out of it. Sometimes they might not be able to tell you, or sometimes they might tell you something completely different from what the actual problem is, because they might also know, they'll know it internally, they'll know it under, but they won't be able to articulate it to you. And your job as the designer is to pull that out, right? And pull it out and put it in a very clear user need, right? Now, the question is, if the user has told you in a different way, if you understand in a different way, how do you make sure you understood the user correctly? And that's why if you see there is a step, an arrow which goes from the second box and the first box to the last box, which is test if the need is solved. And this is very, very critical, okay? So here is how we do it, and here is how it's done, right? Let's say you go spend time with a teacher, right, who is struggling to teach online. You spend a lot of time understanding who the teacher is, what's, let's say, the device they have, how much time they have, what are their needs, what are their motivations, all of this. From there, you come to some sense of here's the problem. Now, the obvious reaction will be, let's go build a solution to solve it. And that's where you have to stop yourself. What to do is not to go forward, but to go back and go back to the user and ask them, from what you shared, this is what we understood is the problem. Are we correct? Right? Now, this might seem counterintuitive. I can't tell you how many times we've done this, and the user will say, no, this is not what I said, right? And for various reasons, we might have misheard, we might have misunderstood, or we made an assumption, which you'll always do, right? There's so much conversation happening. There are so many different people happening. You're speaking with multiple users. You will make mistakes. The thing is not to try and avoid that mistake, but the thing is to have things built in your process which will catch that mistake quickly. So once we've got a handle of, we think this is what the problem is, we don't go ahead and start building. We go back to the user and check with them. Is this correct, right? Only when we hear two things. One, this is correct. And we hear, can you please solve this? Is when we go ahead and build. If they say it's wrong, of course we don't build. But if they are not very, very desperate for that problem to be solved, we don't do anything about it. Because here's the problem. If it is not a very important problem for them, even if you solve it, they'll be too busy and they won't use your solution. And this is a mistake that happens so often. It's a mistake I have made so many times in my life. And so the trick is you have to solve the correct problem for the user, but you also have to solve the most important problem for the user. And you should not start building a solution till you figure out the correct and the most important problem for the user. Until that time, you're just spending time in the first two steps. You're understanding the user, you're understanding, empathizing them, their context. You're figuring out what the problem is, you're writing it down, you're discussing with each other, you're going back to them, right? And this is a very, very important step. Now, as designers, we love to design. The whole trick of user-centered design is to actually do design much later and not early, but to spend all of the early time and all of your most important time on the user part, not on the design part, okay? Now, assuming you're able to come to the right problem, the user agrees this is the right problem, they're like, this is amazing, please solve this for us, enough users around you want it. Then you go to the design part, right? Now here, you switch to a very different mode. It's all open-ended. It's all, everything is open. You try out as many things. There is no, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? You go look at other solutions. You try and learn from them. You try and innovate. You look at other fields. You try and come up with interesting things, right? When we do this, we hear a lot of, what if we and someone will wonder and go from there, right? And you encourage that, right? Now, most ideas in that phase will be bad. No problem. Out of 100 bad ideas, somewhere through some connection, someone will come up with a magical idea, very different idea, which will solve the problem. So it's very, very critical that you be very open-minded, very open-ended, and let whatever come to you, right? You have to be very open to the ideas. You have to be very open to the solution, because the ideas are very fragile, right? Now, the way we do it is when we have some contour of, okay, this is what the solution will look like. We don't start immediately building it. You can guess what we do. We take it back to the user and we show to them. If we build this, do you think this will solve your problem? Again, I can't tell you the number of times we get such valuable feedback saying, no, this will not solve because of this reason. Now, that thing is very important, but they never told us. They never told us because they didn't know it was important to tell us, which they tell us now, right? And it's not their job to tell us. It's our job to figure that out. And that those insights save you so much time, so much pain later, right? Because what's the most painful thing as a designer? To pour your heart and soul into building something and no one cares. No one uses it, right? You all know, like I've experienced this so many times. I'm sure you've experienced it sometimes. It's very, very painful. And so the way to avoid it is to check even before you build, okay? Here's the problem you told us. So we show it to them. Here's the problem you told us. Here is the solution we think that will solve the problem. Do you agree? And we'll show them prototypes, we'll show them examples. And if we say, if we hear a strong yes, is when we go and build. Okay, now there are exceptions to this. Sometimes you have to do a little bit differently, but I'll keep those exceptions out for now, right? In most situations, this will work really, really well. Once we hear a really strong resonance, please build this. We love this. This will be really cool. Is when we sort of go and start building the solution, right? And then in each phase of it, we will sort of go back and check with the user, is this working or not, right? Now, as some of you mentioned, this is very much based on design thinking, on lean production, lean startup, where all of these philosophies, right? Agile software development, they've across various different fields, all have figured out the same core principles, which is don't build without understanding. Don't build without checking with the user. Don't build without making sure it's important, right? Because your most precious thing is your time. And you don't want to put your time into building things which are not useful. And when you focus on the user this way, the other thing it does is surprising insights come, new different things come. And that's the magic of this. Not only does it save you time, it really helps you really, come up with things that you would never have thought, right? And I'll give a couple of examples on this. So maybe let's go to the next slide. Right, a company that does this really, really well, right? That we personally like is this a company you might know of called IKEA, right? It's just coming to India. They have a big store in Hyderabad. They make furniture, right? Now, how IKEA does it is, they don't sell you the full furniture. If you go to an IKEA store, they'll send you the parts of the furniture, right? So if you're buying a chair, they won't sell you the full chair. They'll send you the seat, the stool, the handles, all of that. And you go back and put it together. Now they do it because it's cheaper, it's easier, people can, transport them easily, lots of different reasons. However, many, many years ago, they discovered this problem that people were really struggling to put together this furniture. Now the furniture is very well made and it's very cheap. That's why people like it. It's very high quality, but it's very cheap. And one of the reasons is because they break it into parts and give it to you, which you can put together. But what they found was that their users were really struggling to put together this furniture, right? Now you can imagine, right? A lot of their clients were young married couples, right? Husband, wife went, bought the furniture, very good, it's cheap, it's high quality. Now they're trying to make it. They've spent sort of 1 hour trying to make it. It's not happening. Now they're angry at each other. The wife is yelling at the husband is yelling at the wife. You are an idiot. We should never have gone. Right? You can imagine it's not a good situation for the user, but it's also not a good situation for IKEA because the user is very angry at IKEA. What is this manual? We can't understand it. So IKEA spent a lot of time trying to understand, okay, what was the problem, right? What was the issue? And what they found were 2 things. One is they found was that the manuals were very confusing. So people were not able to understand. It was very, very complicated. And the second thing was it was not a fun experience. It was a miserable experience for the user, right? And that's very important as a designer. Will your user enjoy themselves when they're going through your design? If they are angry, they're frustrated, they'll be angry at you, right? And they won't use your product again. And so a big thing was they said, okay, what we have to do is we have to design a manual that not only makes building this furniture easy, but it's a very fun, joyful experience. Right? Now, they could not have understood this if they didn't really empathize with the user, with the frustration, with the anger. And so they understood that they have to replace this anger with joy. They have to replace this frustration with fun. And so that's when they went, right? And they went to sort of really opening, seeing how they could do it. And they came with the most unexpected of solutions, right? So if you've ever seen an IKEA manual, what you will see is it's the simplest thing. And you can go to the next slide. It's the simplest manual with only pictures and no words. That's the thing, right? So they went saying people are not understanding what we're writing. The obvious solution would have been to write more, to explain more, to give more examples. But because they figured out that actually, no, that was not true, that was not helping, they went the other way, which is remove all words. And they understood a very important human insight, right? That people don't like to read. That's why more people are on Instagram than on Twitter. That's why more people watch TV than read books, right? So they understood that, right? But the thing was, now this, I'm sure this is not a very obvious solution. And then it must have been crazy. They're like, what, remove words? Have you lost your mind? Right? But then they did what user-centered design does, is no need to build it, just go check with the user. So they took it to some users, showed it. The users loved it. They're like, this is so much fun. I can understand this. Now seems like an achievement. And that's how the iconic IKEA manual came, right? Now, because of this, they got many other benefits that they had never thought. Right? Think of it. If there are no words, then the same manual can be used in any country. No need to translate, right? They come to India, they're not making a manual for every state. The same manual goes everywhere. It's the same manual that they sell in Sweden, the same manual in USA. And so there are really incredible things that they're able to do because of this, because they were able to focus on exactly what the user was feeling, the frustration, the feelings, the emotion, and then really figure out a clear problem and then come up with a very innovative way to solve it. Okay, so that's really, in a very simple sense, what user-centered design is, and what sort of this is used across the world by many different entities. And before we move on, let's take a minute to pause. And why don't you write in 2 or 3 sentences what you are taking away on what user-centered design is, right? You have to write it in your own words, as Anu said. It's very critical. 2, 3 sentences. You can write it on a notebook, or you can even send it on chat. But how would you summarize what you're taking away as what is user-centered design? Okay, some really interesting sort of summaries are coming from people. And now what we're going to move to the next section is to connect it to how we used it in education and how we built our virtual learning program with this. Yeah, Preeti has a great point in connecting it with the user. Again, Priya's point on really putting ourselves in the shoes of the user. being conversational with the user, as Deepak is saying. Great. Um, and now let's really sort of, and in 321, we often try and sort of first go outside education, look at examples from there, and then bring it to education. Right? We feel, like I said, it broadens your horizon to see outside and then to bring in. Now, what we'll share is an example of how did we use it to build, a program called CAPE, right? So let's go in from here. Right now, like all of you, we were hit with the pandemic. What 321 does is we build programs that improve learning outcomes in schools, right? So we have teacher training, we have curriculums, we have assessments, and these programs are all in person. We sort of give them with teachers. We do trainings in schools. Now, the moment pandemic happened, as you can imagine, everything went out of the window. Suddenly, all of that changed, right? And so a lot of what we had built was not very relevant to what is there in the world right now. And so we tried to understand from teachers, okay, what is it that they were going through? What is it that the need was, right? So we went back and really tried to understand what was happening with the teachers, right? So let's give an example, right? So one of the teachers we spoke with was this Khushbu ma'am, right? She's a math teacher in a low-income school. Her children come from very poor backgrounds. She's about 24 years old. She earns for her living. And there are various different responsibilities at home that she has to do with, at school. There are lots of different responsibilities. And we wanted to understand what was the pandemic doing to what Khushbu ma'am had to do, what were the challenges, and so what we needed to now design and build for her. Okay, so we dug into this, and you can go to the next slide. The first thing was really understanding what is it that Khushbu ma'am needs, right? So what gives her joy as a teacher? What frustrates her? What does she need in the pandemic? What is working? What's not working? So both understanding her outside the pandemic context, but then also in the pandemic context, right? What are all the changes that are happening and really resonating? Now, we've done a lot of work with teachers before, because like I said, right, our primary work is with teachers, and through teachers we work with students, but you can apply this to anyone, right? You can apply the teacher to students, all of that. So we really try to understand everything about, like, as simple as what mobile phone does she have, how much data does she have, what mobile phones do her students have, do they have mobile phones or not, what data do they have, how many devices are available, what is possible, and really get a holistic picture. Then where we went from here was to really sort of now put this together into a persona, right? So if you go on the next slide, actually go to the next one. So we would create a persona like this, like her, like many teachers like her, right? You can just have a quick read of this. I'll wait for 30 seconds. Right. So as we spoke with teachers like Khushbu ma'am, and like this is like a persona that you can create, right? Like we're trying to capture information of how we understand this person. And we spoke with many, many teachers, right? What became very clear that one of the things that Khushbu ma'am loved was engaging with her students, helping them sort of learn better, and being able to make sure that she was able to manage her school life and her home life well, right? What the pandemic had done was taken all this away. Right now, she had no engagement with her users. There was a lot of now preparation that she had to do. She had to juggle all these online things, and she was starting to become very, very frustrated. Right, her biggest problems were that she was not used to teaching online. There was so much content out there. She didn't know how to pick, what to pick. She didn't know how to put them together in a PPT. Even if she did, she couldn't send them something. Students only had WhatsApp. There was only one mobile phone. At best, a child could use it for 10, 20 minutes, nothing more than that. And so these were the things that were really coming out. And what we found was that most of the things that she was finding were not suitable for mobile, or were not suitable for, let's say, the 15, 20 minute that a child might be able to get, right? Many of our students, most of our students, and I think many of your students might be from backgrounds where there might be one device in the whole house, right? So you can't assume that the child will have a laptop to themselves for 3 hours, right? Maximum they'll get one phone for 15, 20 minutes. And so it's very, very critical. Like, so these are things we understood in that, right? The same issue with Khushbu ma'am. Khushbu ma'am did not have a laptop. She only had a phone, right? So she was trying to make PPTs on phone. It was not going to work for her. And what she found was even tools like Zoom that you and I are using were not comfortable for her and definitely not comfortable for the students, right? So from all of this, we got a good sense of, okay, what are the resources? What are the challenges for her students? What are the problems? And we said, okay, now let's try and sort of create something for her, right? So let's really understand the problem. So what became very clear was that Khushbu had, and her life responsibilities had increased in the pandemic. She had to do more work at home, all of that. So she actually had limited time and energy. She had almost less time in some way than she had normally, right? So we have to design something that Khushbu ma'am can use in that time. She can then send it to her students in a way that the students can easily access, which means it has to be WhatsApp, it has to be very simple 15-20 minute content, and that it is not complicated for the teacher or for the child, right? Because the parents are often not literate, they might not be very easy, it might not be very easy for them to use the mobile phone, so it had to be very, very simple. So once we understood this problem, we took it back to Khushbu ma'am, we took it back to principals, we took it back to other teachers to check with them, is this correct? And they all told us, yes, this is exactly what we need. This is what we're struggling with many of the existing solutions. They don't work on our mobile, or they don't work with the constraints we have. Can you all build this? Okay, that was the license for us to go and build something. So we spent a couple of weeks really designing, building iteratively. And what we came up with was this thing called CAPE, which is our program, right? Now, if you see on the right, is the prototype we built. Now, everything you see, we were right from day one designing on the mobile phone. We were never, because our user is going to use a mobile phone, we are going to use a mobile phone. We were not building on laptop and then trying to translate it to mobile phone, right? So we came up with these very simple 3 pages, which had pictures, which had all of this. And this was the full lesson. Now, this lesson was aligned to the textbook that Khushbu ma'am had to teach. And Khushbu ma'am would just send the link to children on WhatsApp, and the children would go through it and they would be able to master the content. It had pictures, it had videos, all of this. We showed it to Khushbu ma'am, we showed it to other teachers, we showed it to the principal, they all loved it. Amazing. But we said, you know what? The eventual user is the child. So let's go check with children also. So we gave it to some parents, we gave it to some children. And then to our horror, we watched that they didn't do it any way that we thought they would do. Right? You see the buttons at the bottom to click, they really didn't click anything. There was a whole audio message at the top, which would tell the child what to do because there's no teacher to give instructions. Well, no child clicked that. And we very clearly realized that, okay, fine, this is not going to work. Like the child will not be able to click, they'll not be able to read. So we went back and we said, okay, we have to redesign this prototype. So we went through a few versions, and then sort of the next version of the prototype is what you see on the next screen, right? Now you can see it just has 3 parts. Super simple, right? There is a video, there is then an activity, and then there's a surprise, right? Now, we again took it to children, we took it to teachers, and we saw that the students, when they saw that video and the play button, they all very quickly understood that they have to click that. Now, the video was between 10 to 15 minutes. It was easy for the child to understand. And it was our job to find the right video and then to find the right activity that they could do after the video, right? And what we would do is we would give it to parents and we would ask parents to film the child using this and send that video to us for us to really see what was happening, right? No instructions. And we did a few of these testing cycles and we realized, okay, what to remove, what to keep, what helps, what doesn't help. And we came to this very simple 1 page, no clicking, just the core content and a really fun video, the homework. And then there's this little surprise button, right? Which was like a fun activity that the child could do beyond the device, because the device is only there for 15-20 minutes. It was a game, it was a song, it was something fun, something more, something different, and children loved that. And so now we felt we had something that, it could work with the child, the teacher, the principal, all that. So this is what we released, right? It went really well, but then we ran into a different set of problems, right? Now, the problem that we ran into after this was that the way we had designed it was we would send the link, okay? So the teacher or the principal would get the link. Now they would sort of give it to the child, send it to the child. Now this, early on it was 5-10 schools, 20-50 teachers, it was fine. Then very quickly started getting complicated, right? Now, the schools and teachers had different requirements. So one teacher said, I want to send English and math on one day, and I want to send math and science on the other day. Okay. Somebody said, no, I want to send all 3 on the same day. Somebody said, no, I'll send only one thing on one day. And now we're like, okay. The issue is the way we had designed it, the whole system was that we would be sending to the teacher or the principal, the teacher and the principal would be sending it to them. but it was not working for them, right? It was causing a problem to what they wanted to do with it, right? So we went back and we said, okay, plus it was becoming very complicated for us, right? So where we had to send all these links, right? So we went back and we said, okay, what's the fundamental problem? The problem was that we were the bottleneck, that we had the content, we had to give the content to the teacher, and then the teacher would give it to the student. But if the teacher wanted to give it some other way from us, we were becoming the problem. So we said, okay, let's remove ourselves, right? So what we did was we created then this next version, which if you see on the next slide, which basically it's like a menu, right? So the teacher goes on the first page that you see on the left. So we have all the grades, we have all the subjects, we have it by the board, and the teacher goes and so let's say I'm a grade 5 EVS teacher. So I will just go click that button, right? So I've got this link as a teacher, I just go click it and this page opens up. Now what this page shows is all the lessons which I have to teach as part of my textbook, right? That's what teachers have told us consistently, is we get good content, but we don't get content which is related to what we have to teach. So we made sure, and that's why it's a different lesson for every board, because it is related to what they have to teach, right? And so week 1, you see on the right, all the lessons are there. Now, if you go into that, you will see what each lesson basically looks like is there are 4 boxes very simply, right? There is sorry, one slide before. Yeah. So what we did was we linked this lesson to the WhatsApp API. So what you could do, the next slide one, is the teacher could just press the WhatsApp button and the lesson would go automatically to the children. However, there were 2 options of the same lesson. One was a picture lesson, so exact same lesson, but with the picture. And the second was a video lesson. Same lesson, same activity, but with the video. Now, why did we do it? Because some principals and teachers told us that some of our children do not have data to play video. They can see a picture, they can't play a video. So for every lesson, we made 2 options. And now, even the children who had gone back to the villages who only had 2G, teachers could send something to them, right? So we added that specifically because they said we want to even reach the children who don't have high data. Now you also see there's an I next to it, right? Now this I was an interesting thing. How do we figure it out? Initially, we didn't have this I thing there, right? It was just a link for teachers to send. Now what we saw teachers doing was when we would give them this, they would do all kinds of things, which is first send it to themselves, the lesson, test it out, all of that. So we asked them, why are you doing this? They said, before I send something to the child, I want to test it myself. How you've built a system is you can send it directly to the I can send it easy to the child, but I have no way of testing it, which makes sense. A teacher would not want to send something to the child without checking it, right? So what we did was we added this view for the teacher to be able to see the lesson. If they're happy, they send it. If they're not, then they can make edits when they send it and send that. Okay. And so, and all of this came because of that empathy piece that I talked about, right? We would go to the teacher, ask them what they were not liking, what was frustrating, or just half the time observe them, because, teachers didn't tell us that this is what they were doing. We would just ask them to, okay, use this interface. Don't talk to us, just show us what you're doing. And when they were doing it, we saw, oh, this is what they're doing. And so from there, we realized that if this is what they're doing, we should just make it easy for them to do it, right? And so this is how it looked, right? Now, if you go to the next sort of page, what all of this became was that the teacher would just go, click the relevant lesson and send it to the students. It would go as there. Then the teacher would add an audio note explaining that in different languages, different ways. And then based on that, students would start responding. The teacher would then reply back, give messages. The most heartening thing that I heard from this was teachers would say, before your solution, it would take us 7 hours to plan. Now it takes us 7 minutes. What we do with the rest of time is we spend it in supporting our children. We ask them questions, we give them examples, we call them up, and they're like, this is what we wanted, right? Technology can make everything easy, but the technology can't make the most important thing easy, which is the magical ability of a teacher to reach into a child, to understand the child, to see the child's potential, even when the child has forgotten it, and help that potential come out. Only a human being can do it. No machine can ever do it. What technology should do is make that easier for teachers. So all the time that was being wasted in finding all of this stuff, we made it super easy. And we gave them flexibility. If you want to change it, change it. Use it for how you want. But what that will allow you to do is it will allow the teacher to now spend all their time on the child, on helping the children, on understanding the children, on motivating the children. And that's really what the magic was. That's what they came back to us is that's what, if you go to the first slide when we showed you, that's what Khushbu ma'am loved. And what this pandemic and the situation had done was taken that away, because she was spending all her time creating PPTs on her phone. And what we were able to give back to her was she can't be in person, but a different way to engage with children and to spend most of her time engaging with children. So that's really sort of how GAPE got built. And I think because we were able to hit on some real true user needs, the adoption really surprised us, right? So if you go to the next sort of page, we started in our first week with about 60 schools. We gave it about 300 teachers started using it, 6,000. In 5 weeks, it had gone 800 schools. More than 12,000 teachers were using it, 2.5 lakh children across 350 cities, right? And since then, it just kept growing. It's almost now 1,000 schools are using it, 15,000 students, teachers, and almost 3 lakh students are getting benefited from it, right? And every time we would get more teachers and more schools, we would hear the same things from them. It's like, oh my God, you understood us. Oh, this is what we wanted, right? It's like, they're like, you've read our mind. Well, we didn't read their mind, right? We just used the user-centered design to really listen, do lots of feedback with them, do lots of feedback with students, with parents, with constant iteration. And that's what allowed us to build something that was really fit to their need in that situation, what they wanted. So that's an example, hopefully that will help you understand of how and this was a completely new program. We built it in 2 weeks, right? Before that was all in person, everything, training, physical books, and we made it all online in just a very short duration using this user-centered approach. And hopefully the whole point of sharing this is hopefully this will help you, right? Now, the third section is that we'll tell you some tools and frameworks and techniques of how to actually use this. But before that, I want to stop here actually. If anybody has any burning questions, any thoughts that they want to clarify, let's sort of cover that and then we'll go ahead on how you can apply this.
Hi. So Gaurav, a lot of questions have been answered by Gunjali. If you
Okay.
open the Q&A section and go to the answered
Sure.
tab, you will see that Gunjali has already answered a lot of questions. You can read some of the questions from there and just see if you want to comment on any of those. I also have some other questions with me, which I can ask. Should I do that?
Sure.
Okay. So one question is, how did you come up with the empathy map?
And we'll actually talk about that in the next section, but it's just a lot of listening, asking open-ended questions and just lots of listening, hours and hours of listening. And that's a real, and we'll share a little bit about that. It's both an art and a science, but the key is just to listen as respectfully and as honestly as you can.
Thank you. The next question by Roma is, how many students were covered in each class? If teacher needs to respond individually, isn't it cumbersome?
Yeah, so, that's a great question, Roma, right? So the point is what we saw was in general, let's say in a class of 40, anything between 20 to 30 students were responding. Now, there are other tools that are much better for doing one-on-one responses, all of that, right? Like even for this, right? If you have to do what we're doing here, Telegram is a much better tool than WhatsApp, right? And there are much more sophisticated tools. The issue is an important point in design that we have to remember is you have to have the least amount of friction, right? The problem was all the teachers were on WhatsApp, all the children or most of the parents were on WhatsApp. Now, getting them to download something, change a different program, and everybody is remote. It's not like they're in school, we can go do one session, get everyone to download, right? Everybody's in different places. So the point is, what you have to do is you have to use what's called the path of least resistance. It's like how water flows, right? If you see how water flows from anywhere to the ocean, it never attacks the boulder straight on. It finds the least and the simplest path through it, right? And that's the same thing here, right? Now, there were many more sophisticated tools which would have solved some of these problems better. The issue was no one would use them. You couldn't get a teacher or a child to download them, especially in pandemic situations. So we went with the tool that everyone had, and let's say we'll build our solution on top of that. And we gave teachers tools, notebooks there or other ways of tracking, and we built some solutions to track and take feedback. But one of the big things that we've learned is you have to start with what the user is already using and fit it into their existing tools and workflows. You have a much better chance of adoption. Then later, you can ask them to switch, and if they really like you and you're really helpful, they'll switch. But you have to start with where they are, where they already are.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Another question by Ritesh is about using bots with WhatsApp for some direct interaction between a teacher and student. And we have another question on WhatsApp that how about seeking feedback through the same channel, that is again WhatsApp?
Sure. So bots, here's a simple thing. WhatsApp bot is a very, very limited and very, very expensive tool. Okay. So every reply that goes from a bot, unless asterisks for certain solutions, you as a provider pay for every message. Right? So if a user is asking 5 questions and your bot is replying, you're paying for every single message. Now go back to the slide which shows how many users we have, how many people we have, and you can do the math and you can imagine that it can bankrupt an organization, right? And we don't have that much money. We're a small not-for-profit. And it's a very limited tool, right? So you have to get permission from, there are only certain entities that give you permission. Every new thing you have to add, right? So if you add a new question, has to get approved from WhatsApp. You have to get an approval from there. It takes 15 days, right? So it's useful in certain situations. It's useful if you have a certain use case and if you have a lot of money. But for a lot of educators, it's very, very expensive. Again, Telegram is much better than that, right? It has all of this natively built in. The issue is nobody uses Telegram, or at least our teachers and our children didn't use Telegram. And we asked them, we felt we couldn't get them to switch in the middle of this, right? So that's why we didn't go with bots. With feedback, what we've been trying is a few different things. One is that teachers are collecting feedback based on how students are responding. And we've tried sort of, sending simple links of Google Forms and quizzes. We found that they work. There are certain conditions of what needs to be there in the kind of school, the children's background, all of that, the teachers support. But in certain conditions, that works fairly well. That doesn't work in every condition. But a mixture of teacher getting feedback and filling it and sharing with us doing some direct interviews with children and parents and teachers, and for using certain kind of Google Forms which children can do on their own. Those seem to be working really well for feedback.
Thank you so much. We have a question from FB Live, which
Sure.
says that what platforms was this content designed on and in what formats?
Sure. So again, we use the simplest possible tools, right? So the remember what I told at the start, right? One of the things we've learned from listening to, reading about, observing great designers is they only talk of user. They only talk of user and user problems. And when we saw mediocre designers, they only talk about their product and their tools, right? So we try and keep our tools very simple, and we try and keep our understanding of the user very sophisticated, right? So we try and know the user as well as they know themselves, sometimes even better. And we try and keep everything that we are doing very simple. So for the user, the tool was WhatsApp. And actually for us, all of this was built on Google Slides, published on the web, right? Now, why do we use Google Slides? We know there are lots of different solutions. You can do lots of fancy things with. The issue was you saw how quickly we were changing based on user feedback, right? Teachers would tell us something today, we would change it in the next couple of hours, which teachers loved, right? We can't do those changes if we have our own app, which takes 6 months to build, right? We can't make those changes if it's going through a website and you need a web designer to change it, right? So what we were able to do was able to change content in literally 2 hours or even less, because we had built it on Google Slides that our team was very comfortable with. And then we used certain features of making it like a web page and putting it there, right? And so we made our tools super easy for the user and super easy for ourselves, so that we could be very responsive to their needs and we could build it exactly as it was required.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. I suggest we move on with the presentation and take other
Great.
questions later.
Yeah, great. So now we'll go to just the last bit, and it's a simple slide with 3 really useful tips. Right now, you can go read on user-centered design. You can go read on design thinking, lean startup, and you'll get lots of content. Right? We wanted to share with you 3 things that have helped us the most, and they've solved the biggest problems for us, and lessons we've learned from lots of failure. And so, if you can, because of our lessons, get better faster, that's the aim of this webinar. Okay. So here are the 3 lessons. First is the empathy interviews, right? And somebody asked about this, right? Empathy map, how did you create that, right? What we found is what's most useful is to go with open-ended questions, not closed-ended, right? So we don't start with what is the problem you are facing with teaching online? Or we don't start with, are you facing problems in finding content? Or finding content is a problem, yes or no? We go with very open-ended questions, right? How are you doing? Are there any problems you're facing? What are some of the challenges? What frustrated you last week? What made you really sad or angry last week when you were planning for your lesson, right? Where did you feel a lot of, failure there, right? So you can see very open-ended questions, right? And the conversation can go anywhere, and it goes anywhere, right? With the teacher talking about frustration with the school principal, with the school principal talking about the frustration with the teacher, or the father-in-law, or the mother-in-law, or the children, anywhere, right? And we just listen in, right? But it's important to go with very open-ended questions, lots of non-verbal cues, right? Like you're listening, you're understanding, right? Because for the person to openly share with you, they have to trust you. And they will not trust you if they don't feel that you care about them and that you respect them. And so big part of these empathy interviews is to make sure that they feel that trust, that respect there. And so what we'll do is we'll go with these open-ended questions and we'll just wait and ask them with a lot of respect. We push and try and get stories, right? Because remember, right, when you're doing these interviews, people will keep telling you about solutions. People will say, you should do this, build this for us, right? What we keep asking them is, tell us a story. So tell us about a time when you were planning for a lesson and you really got stuck, right? That's what you would ask the teacher. Or we'd ask the principal, right? Ma'am, tell us when you were trying to support your teachers and you really found it difficult or you were struggling a lot. That's it. And we'll let them share whatever they want to share, right? And we'll keep asking these. We'll ask these multiple times. We'll ask them as multiple teachers, multiple different principals. And through all that they say is where we generate the insights that they come, right? Now, what we found is the better we do this process, the better everything else happens. And there are times when you're rushed, you want to skip through it. Whenever we've skipped through it, we've paid the price later, because our solution will not be built. It will not have that magical property that people love, right? Whenever we do it, people at the end will be like, you read our mind. Teachers will be like, we love this so much. Thank you so much for building it. And we've seen that only happens when we've done the empathy interviews really, really well. And one tricky and difficult part is to keep a lot of silence. We'll ask them a question, they'll not be sure, we'll wait. You keep silence there, right? You let them think, you let them respond there, because that's where the insights come. See, you will know the solution best, but they know the problems best, and they will know whether the problem what you're saying will work for them or not. And that's why it's very important to give them time and space. So you can do some on, let's say, your checklist or whoa, but at least some of those you have to do as a conversation. Live is in front of each other is best, but you can even do a video call or you can do an audio call, right, in these times. But it's very, very important to hear from them. And then throughout the process, we will use their direct quotes, right? So even when we're debating with each other, because there's lots of debate, right? Viraj says, I want to build this, I think this is the right thing. I'll say, no, we will not we'll use direct user codes. Yes, but remember when Khushbu ma'am said this, I think this solution or this feature will solve that better. And the way you win an argument is by using those user codes, right? You're able to bring reason through that, right? So those user codes are very, very important. And so a big thing we've learned is don't skip this step. Do it really well, do it really deeply. So that's the first really powerful lesson we've learned by making many, many mistakes. The second thing was, when the whole defined user problem comes, what we realized was, so let's say I went interviewed some teachers. Viraj from our team who's on this call went and interviewed some other teachers. Gunjali who's also on this call went and interviewed some other teachers. Then we came back and we talked about it. And we all sort of felt we had understood the problem correctly. The issue was the problem in my head was slightly different from what Viraj was thinking, from what Gunjali was thinking. So I'll give you an example. I thought the problem was the teacher can't find good content. Viraj's thought from his interviews, the problem was teacher can find good content, but the teacher can't make PPTs. And Gunjali thought the problem was actually she can make PPTs and all, but she can't use on mobile. Now, these are all related but slightly different problems. Now, if you don't come together and align on what the problem actually is, you will end up creating very different products, right? All three of us working on the same team doing something else. So what we found was in that defined problem stage to have a statement that puts this problem down correctly. And that's what this statement we found very useful, right? So basically the statement in one line, you should be able to describe what is the situation when the problem happens, what's the motivation of the user, and what is the expected outcome of the user. Okay, so you need to be able to write it. When blank happens, I want to do blank so I can have blank. Okay, and when you write it down this way, you'll find it's very hard, right? And you will also figure out that basically you've understood it incorrectly, and also that all of you in your team have different definitions of what the problem is, right? And so, for example, what we realized was that some of the problem statements were the teacher said, when I want to plan for my class, so that's a situation, planning for my class, I want to put a simple plan that I can send to my students so I can feel I am helping their education even in this time. Okay, that's one example. Or you can have a much narrower example. When I have found a good video, I want to save it so I can use it in my plan later. Okay, so what we found is, now there are lots of different formats for writing this user problem, user definition, right? You can use whatever. This is the one we find most useful. The thing more than the format is to make sure you write the problem down, you get it validated, checked with the user, and that everyone on the team agrees that this is the problem. If you don't come to this agreement and you think you have the agreement, later what will happen is you will all be, it's like, you know how it is. I'll give an example. Let's say you want to do a relay race, right? Now, everybody is sort of standing in different lanes. And then you're angry at each other that everybody's run to the different to the stadium. And then you're trying to get everyone back. Nahi, wapas aao, come back, right? But now everyone's gone, right? How will you get back? So it's very important to make sure that everybody is in the same lane, the running lane for the relay race, which is what problem solving is in a team. And so it's very, very critical that everyone aligns on this is the problem. This 1, 2, 3 statements are the problem. And we have to sort of get that together between us and with the with the user. Right? So this is the second lesson. And we made so many of these mistakes and they're very painful. I'm sure some of you experienced them. And so it's really useful to, before you start building any solution, to norm on this. And the last lesson that, that we've really learned very powerfully. So there's a saying in design which says, one prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. Okay. What that means is, let's say you are making a, like you saw a solution, right? Like we're trying to make a page of this is what the child will see. Right? Instead of doing lots of meetings to discuss what should go in this page, what should go, I think this should go, Viraj says, no, I think this should go, or let's go speak with this person, or we'll write a document explaining. No. What we all do is we all design the page on a simple piece of paper. We design, here is what the child will see, and we bring it to each other. And then we talk about each other's prototypes. And I cannot tell you how many problems it saved for us. How many meetings, right? What would require 10 meetings now needs 1 meeting, because we can quickly come, we can see, oh, no, this will not work. Oh, this will work, right? This is how it can go. And we take these same prototypes to the user. We take them to the teacher. We take them to the principal. We take them to the parent and say, will this work? Again, what it does is it saves us a lot of time before we have to redo or undo anything, because we've not built anything. We've just made it on paper. What it also does is you can start mixing, matching. I look at Viraj's prototype, like, interesting. Agar I take that part of his prototype and I put it in my prototype, this will happen. Right? So, lots of mixing of ideas and like the innovation that happens, right? What is creativity? Creativity is just connecting to things, different things that no one saw, that you can connect in a new way. That's what it is. And so that's what this process prototyping allows you to do, right? Bring it together in a really, really powerful way. So we found this a very useful tool for resolving differences, for resolving fights within the team, for getting feedback from the user. So this would be the third thing that, these three things, now we make sure always happen, because we've seen that when we don't do this, lots of problems happen. So that's what we wanted to share. Yeah.
Just wanted to give you a time check. We have
Yeah.
another minute remaining. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm pretty done here. So, this has been very, very useful for us as a way to build things, as a way to keep the user in mind. And the aim was to show the larger theory, to show how we applied it, and some techniques in this that help us really, really well. And hope you found useful. And if you have any more questions, you can just reach out to us and happy to answer that.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. We don't have time for more questions, but I will make sure that we collate them and send them across to you for sure. Thank you so much for your time and expertise today. I request you to kindly share a few words on this webinar.
It was really fun. It was fun putting it together. Viraj and Gunjali from our team did a lot of work, and hope it was useful for the participants.
Yeah. Thank you, Viraj, for help with the presentation, and thank you, Gunjali, for writing all the answers, responding to all the answers in the Q&A section. Thank you so much. To reach out to 321, you can write to them at contact.us@321-foundation.org. This link will be pasted in the chat window. Our next webinar is with Wonder Girls, the power of inspiration in the times of the pandemic, scheduled for September 2nd, 3 p.m. You can register at the link that will be pasted in the chat window shortly. Before you leave, please take a minute to give us feedback on your learning experience on the webinar today. This will help us grow and improve our resources for you. Also, once you fill the feedback form, like I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving the attendance certificate on your registered email ID. Please follow @Firki Portal on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for more updates. Thank you so much and have a very good evening.
Thanks a lot, Anu and the Firki team.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anu. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Viraj.